Welcome. My name is William Messacar. I am a master model railroader in the 4th Division of the Pacific Northwest region of the National Model Railroad Association. I want to welcome all of you to the virtual layout tour we'll have presented today by members of the NMRA. We would encourage you to find out about the NMRA and join in order to participate in these virtual tours. We have other virtual clinics and other activities for the National Model Railroad Association that we think you'll find a big help to your modeling, and you'll get to meet model railroaders just like you. So welcome to our tour, and I hope you enjoy it.
Now we're going to see Bill Busacca's RGS layout.
There's been a lot of jokes and talks about Rio Grande Southern people being sort of Johnny-come-latelys to a cute railroad. And I'm going to have to bypass that because I was in the public health service in the early 70s on the Navajo reservation between Gallup and Four Corners. And my wife, fortunately or unfortunately, brought home Josie Moore Crumb's book from the Gallup Public Library. And if I hadn't found a copy to buy, I probably would have stolen it. And I was hooked. I've been a RGS fan since for 49 years, since 1971. This particular neon sign I had custom made by a neon artist in Spokane who was a friend of my brother's. The two caboose lanterns were in my dental office along with a bunch of American Flyer. And when I retired, I brought them with me. Down here is an actual RGS tie. That tie was used as a base for a bottle jack when they restored Goose number 5. Among the junk up here is a couple of Jeffrey spikes and some rails and so forth. Most of you probably are narrow gaugers, but standard gauge. This is probably about a 30-pound rail over here on the left. And this is, I don't think that's 100, that's only about an 80 or 100-pound rail, probably. Modern 100-ton cars need a 130-pound rail. And this is an actual brick from the Rico engine house. So I'm about as deep into this as you can possibly get. But I have been distracted. Being somewhat ADHD, I tend to get distracted. And I started my HON3 layout in the mid-70s. But then I got hooked up with the mountaineers, and I mountain climbed for 10 years, climbed over 60 peaks in the Northwest, including Glacier, Baker, Adams, Shasta, Hood, and 3 times on Rainier and twice on St. Helens. So got distracted for about 10 years while I was still building the railroad. And then I got distracted by go-kart racing, and we're not talking about dirt in the backyard go-karts. We're talking about supercarts, road racing. And the supercarts can do the quarter mile, for those of you that have been in the drag strips, in the low 11s in the quarter mile, and they can do 135, 140 down the straightaway. I had 4 season championships in the Northwest. So, but I never lost my interest in the railroad. So I get distracted easily, but not so much anymore. Dale Kreutzer got this map out of the Dale McCoy book. The red is my stretch of the RGS, technically from Dolores to Rico, the midsection. Dave Woodrell does Rico to Ridgeway, and Dale does Dolores to Durango. The blue kind of represents my staging yard. I cheat a little bit. Sawpit's up here near Placerville, between Vance Junction and Placerville, and that's sort of snuck in north of Rico. But you know how we are when we're modelers. We model kind of what we want to do. So the layout room is 20 by 31. This is Dolores up here in the upper middle. Started out when I lived out in the Skoke Valley as just a module. It's 2 3 by 8 foot pieces of 2-inch aluminum angle with 2-inch blue foam and Homosote over the top. The guy who actually welded up the frame for me actually put truss rods on it to make sure that the angle iron did not sag. And I built it that way because I figured at some point I might move and build more layout, which I was correct in assuming. When you come out of Dolores, you head up the Dolores River as they do in the RGS toward Rico, and you go across the river many times. I would guess there's somewhere between 8 and 10 crossings of the river between Dolores and Rico. go through Stoner, Muldoon, and around to Rico. So let's head into Dolores. This is the module that I built out in the Skoke Valley and brought into town to finish the rest of the RGS. This is the days of styrene. Most of these backdrop buildings, warehouses are all styrene. Different age of modeling too. This is all dry brushing. All the weathering is dry brushing. This Taylor warehouse in the lower right-hand corner is got about 5 hours of dry brushing over and over the different colors till it looked like the typical rusty roof that you see. The depot was a PBL Ophir depot. And Bill Peter, in his infinite necessity to have a perfect instruction sheet, still hadn't put out the instruction sheet when I bought the kit. I added the bathrooms and converted it to the Dolores depot. Thank goodness for the commonality of depots. These smaller buildings in the back are HO buildings to create some forced perspective. The other fun thing I had was the deck in front of the depot is 2x8 styrene painted primer and then weathered with chalk pencils. And it's spaced with 5,000 styrene in between when the boards were laid so that they actually looked like, you know, individual boards instead of V-groove siding. And you can see the rest of the buildings. This happens to be the schoolhouse that Dave Woodrow built for me, Ford garage. So I had to digress. I did this morning before I got on board. And what I want to show you is the change in techniques over time as materials have been developed. And I told you that I was doing all my weathering with dry brushing Flocal. Well, this is an RTO PBL boxcar. And what I found was I just love pan pastels. And so this is what you can create with pan pastels. That's an RTO PBL boxcar that has what I call a light weathering. And you streak them. You could use chalk pencils, as Pete does, or you can use, I use the, from Rite Aid, I use the little foam Q-tips that women use to put on eyeliner and makeup and put some streaks in there. And when I'm all done, I take about a 3/4 inch wide flat brush and just kind of lightly drag it across the boxcar to blend all the colors. But if you want something more weathered than that, you can do this. This is, again, pan pastels only. And one of the nice things I would suggest is you can spray the boxcar first with a little dull coat. It adds some tooth so that the pan pastels stick well. It seems like some people are Bragdon chalks people and some people are pan pastel. I think the pan pastel has a little more fixative in it. Seems to stick to stuff better. And if you coat it with dull coat, you get a really, you don't always have to even put dull coat over the top. So there's a shot of the depot at rail fan level. That's the bluff behind the town was to the north of town, and the railroad, even though the railroad went north-south through Dolores, the tracks ran east-west. So this is a little sunset shot on the depot. This is a shot from the north end of town, looking at the depots over on the left and the HO buildings here. Just to mention, this is a Dale Kreutzer backdrop. Dale has been absolutely wonderful about doing this. He models Dolores, but in a very wonderful way that he did this, he models from this side of the bluff side of town, looking at the wooded hillside to the south. So even though we both modeled Dolores, we have a totally different look to our Doloreses so that we don't compete with each other. But he made and printed this backdrop for me and photoshopped it and everything else. And that actually is the actual hillside behind Dolores. That bluff is about 1 block behind these buildings. And it goes up at slightly steeper than a 45-degree angle. So that's the real deal right there. The section house has got some laundry here done with some aluminum foil. The garden's done with about 40 or 60 thousandths wire with some 2000 brass shim cut with scissors, and it curls and it's super glued. A little bit of super tree tops to make some corn, and lots of fun with trying to match the town as well as you can. This, as you might well guess, is a Dale Kreutzer photo. Dale is just, he's not only takes great photos, but he is excellent at photoshopping. So this is through the cottonwood trees, showing the north end of from a different angle, the north end of the yard. I built this high school years ago from one photograph, and then I never noticed the grade school. So a few years back, Dave Woodrell built me the grade school. So we got to have all the schooling covered in Dolores. And this is looking slightly in the other direction, another half building that's used as part of the backdrop. This is my scratch-built Lorraine shovel. Dan Peisel got me the drawings from Tyrex in South Carolina, and he had a few parts from a 00 kit, the scoop, the base, and the treads, and then I used a lot of Eric Bracker parts, and then the top is all custom made with brass and styrene, and it lifts off and you can see all the interior on the Lorraine shovel. Interesting thing about the John Deeres is they're typically on a flat car, and there's a depressed siding right here. The Dolores area is heavy into agriculture, lots of beans and all kinds of agriculture all around Dolores. So this was typically used as a siding to unload flat cars with farm equipment and automobiles. There are some pictures late in the RGS with covered boxcars bringing in automobiles into Dolores. Later on in the last couple of decades of Dolores, this was used as a coaling siding for locomotives. They would put a high side on the neighboring siding with coal and coal it right into the locomotive in the depressed siding. I want to comment on my cottonwood trees. When I made these 25 years ago, I feel like now that I overflocked them, and I'll show you later how I feel I like cottonwood trees in a different look. This is a shot up one of the north-south streets with the bluff again behind on the north end of town, and cattle loading over here. And I love to add details like unloading hay bales for the cattle. And sorry about the edge of the layout on that one. This is the same street with the locomotive moved over onto the main line. And you can see the HO buildings used as forced perspective. And there was an Exxon Mercantile on the main street in Dolores. Montezuma Fruit Company. One of the next slides, you'll see the reefers that were typically lined up in front of the fruit company. Again, all styrene buildings over here. I kind of developed my own technique here. I always liked peeled paint, but when I did my peeled paint here, it looked kind of like a map with all the little tiny lakes in Minnesota. And I said, boy, that doesn't look right. So I just dry brushed it. And now it looked like a better version of peeled paint. But an all styrene building, again, just weathered up. Again, you can tell them right away, this is a Dale Kreutzer shot between the Taylor warehouse, the two warehouses here, in toward the depot. This sign's kind of fun. Gabe Bradford and I, he's just almost an RGS historian, expert. And we argued for about an hour as what this sign said, because there was no photograph that showed the whole sign. So between Gabe and myself, we came up with a name for what was on top of this, warehouse. And the warehouse is, again, made out of styrene, just weathered up with dry brushing, a little bit of careful streaking to show the individual panels of corrugated metal. Pardon this is the end of the Dolores backdrop. This is the backdrop for over by the Clifton and Burnett coal chute in Rico. Dave Woodrell built this, I believe it's a rags kit for the Conoco facility. and he assembled it for me and painted it. But I just don't like Earlshire paint jobs on my layout, so I had to mess with it. So I added trucks, I added people, I added barrels, and I added all the weathering. So all the and classically, what I like, I use two different techniques. One, of course, is dry brushing. The other one is for the rusted rivets on the tanks, is to use a wash of oil paints. A little odorless turpentine and some oil paints will make some really nice rust on the rivets. And of course, you can see the reefers have now showed up at the Montezuma Fruit Company in the background. We're going to move on down up the river, up the Dolores River toward Rico out of Dolores. And I'm going to show you, there may have been somewhere between 6, 8, or 10 bridges between Dolores and Rico, because when you're building a railroad, you got to stay on the wider flat side of the floodplain. And whenever a bluff shows up, you got to cross over the river and go to the other side. So what I tried to replicate was a low bridge where the river is wide and shallow, and a bigger bridge where the river is deep. And so here we got 72A. And so this bridge is a John Kalin bridge. I made a PBO goose with a PFM mechanism in it, a #2 goose, and I made it run like a Swiss watch, and he made me one of his wonderful bridges. So then I created this scene along the Dolores River. This is a Dale Kreutzer backdrop, of course, and Dale and I have worked for a long time to try to make our foreground and our backdrops just blend together as seamlessly as we can make them. So this was my summer project. This is my COVID summer project that I did this summer, is to get this scene. This scene was a piece of plywood for a long time. And the exciting part was taking a saber saw and cutting the river in about a foot at a time so that the entire plywood benchwork did not collapse, and using a fan to exhaust the sawdust out a window and a shop vac to suck up the excess so that my layout did not cover it up with a sawdust snowstorm. This was a fun thing that I wanted to do to add to the scene. Was this is a finest kind kit. What I did is this got about a 4-layer technique to get this point. Hunter line stain, driftwood stain to start with, light gray, maybe light gray stain. And then I streaked it with burnt umber pan pastels. And I wanted to create this because I collect photos of weathered barns, and I really like using color historical photos to kind of get the effect that I want out of my buildings. And then after I put the raw umber or the burnt umber and the driftwood dye on there, then what I did is I covered it with dull coat to seal it in, and then I used Hunter line red barn stain to create this effect. One of my fun things I like to do is I use evergreen styrene corrugated metal for roofs. If there's anything I hate buildings that are really fragile, and the buildings a lot of times made out of wood are really fragile. So by adding an evergreen styrene corrugated roof here, then I put the metal corrugations on with my classic 50-50 mix of MEK and ACC. And I mean to tell you, the corrugated metal strips are not coming off the styrene. And so it makes a strong roof, and yet it still looks like a real roof by using the actual metal strips. A little bit of static grass to show a little hay in the loft. A couple of friends had to add their 2 cents worth. Bill Adkins says, well, by golly, it needs an abandoned car. So a little pan pastel, and we got an abandoned car in the barn. And then Russ Segner says, well, where's the trout fisherman in the river? So now we got a fisherman in the river too. And the tractors were all weathered up with pan pastels. By the way, I have probably another 6, 8, or 10 more John Deere tractors. If anybody needs an S-scale John Deere tractor for their layout, I got some. Now this is the evolution of my cottonwood trees. This is 25 years later. After a Durango convention, Dale and I went over toward Mancos and Hesperus, and I sent home 2 cardboard apple boxes full of sagebrush armatures, walking around with a big stick to chase away the rattlesnakes. So anyway, this is the evolution of cottonwood trees. I like trees that look feathery that you can look through, because cottonwood trees are classic of the Southwest in river bottoms. By the way, the barn sits right here. What I did is shot was taken before I built the barn and put it in the scene. Now we're going to go over to a bigger bridge where the river is typically deeper. This is Bridge 89A, moving around toward Stoner and headed toward Rico. So there's a Hunter Line Bridge, and I happened to buy this bridge rather than build it. I cheated, but I couldn't pass it up at one of the conventions, and so I made the rest of the scene. This is the other end of Dale's backdrop, wrapping around this end of my layout. So now we're going to head into Stoner. Stoner is kind of a whole story almost in and of itself. I created this whole scene as a result of a Rocky Mountain Railroad Club excursion in '47. This happens to be a freight that's coming through. All 5 of my tanks have PBL mechanisms in them, but they have V&T wrappers. And I like the V&T wrappers because they've got all the cracks in the wood, and they're so much nicer to weather. 3 kinds of paint to weather up a tank like this. Flocal for the boxcar red, and then I bleed in oil paints with a little bit of odorless turpentine into all the cracks to create 3-dimensionality to the look of the wood. And then I use acrylics for the white and brown mineral stains. And I do that because if you had seen my Dolores tank, the mineral stains kind of came out slightly pink, and I never liked it. So the technique for a tank is to use 3 different kinds of paint so they don't bleed together. And I think that the effect comes out really well. What was really exciting about this tank is that 3 of my 5 tanks were already on the layout when I added the PBL mechanisms. And I do not recommend that you lean over your layout and put new mechanisms in an existing water tank. That is the hard way to do it. The fun part about this is that the Rocky Mountain Railroad Club excursion came through, and there's some great photos taken by Otto Perry and John Maxwell. And so what I did is I tried to match the photo as much as I could with this. The building, this is a kit, but the section house and the bunkhouse are scratch built. And this gives you an idea with my cottonwood trees, which I had learned to thin out the foliage. And there's the excursion that made me build this whole scene. Is the Rocky Mountain Railroad Club had an excursion in late May of '47. They went from Ridgeway down to Dolores. And in Dolores, the number 20 developed leaking flues. So they brought over the 319 switcher from Durango to take the train back to Ridgeway. And I got really excited as I was trying to build this excursion train when PBL came out with the Chili Line coaches. And it turns out the minute I saw them at the PBL table at a convention, I said, "Oh my God, it's the Chili Line coaches that were on the excursion." And I just got really excited and couldn't pass that up. So that's what this is. And we've got over here to the right, we've got Otto Perry and John Maxwell taking photos of the excursion. And these are the scratch-built buildings. I hate flimsy, weak buildings, as you know from my idea about what I do with corrugated metal roofs. These buildings have an 80,000 styrene substructure, and then the 2x12s are glued to the styrene with a 50-50 mix of MEK and ACC. One of the things I like to do, people use razor saws to distress wood. One of my favorite techniques is to use 40 or 60 grit sandpaper and just drag the boards across the sandpaper 3 or 4 times. And you get all the graining you'd like. the way I did this particular technique is I stained the wood with raw umber, yes, and then I dry brushed on the Depot Buff Jersey Cream paint job, whatever you'd like to call that. And then I used 4x12s for the log structure store. And I'm going to go and do a close-up of the store. And I'm sorry that the foreground buildings are not in focus. I don't have an f/36 lens. And so anyway, that's sorry about the lack of focus in the foreground, but I really wanted you to see the store. The store was, again, one of those models that I built from a photograph. Corrugated metal porch. They built the store out of, logs. And so I just took 4x12s and rounded the corners, used 1x4 strips for the chinking and all that kind of jazz. I think this is a ratchet ball or something I used for the, gas filler. So I had a lot of fun making the building. Now we're going to hit up the Dolores even further to Muldoon. And this was a fun scene that I had to replicate is some drovers moving ahead of, a herd of cows into the stockyard to be loaded for shipment. And, typically with a pack animal behind it and a bunch of cowboys keeping the cows in line. And of course, the owner in his 39 Chevy going down the road, checking to make sure his herd stayed intact. So that was a fun scene. By the way, an interesting thing in my layout is that one of our Northwest friends said, well, how come you don't have the song Rawhide? So what I did is I had a number 50 switcher, the Durango switcher, which initially had not run well. It just needed an upgrade. So I did about the same thing I do to my geese. I added a bigger can motor. I added a flywheel. I added wipers on the wheels. I put a tsunami in it and a speaker in it and a stay alive. It runs like a Swiss watch. I traded that number 50 switcher to Bill Peter, who sent me the recording for the song Rawhide. So if you come through my layout and you want to look at the, herd of cows, you got to push the button and listen to the song Rawhide. Classically, another Dale Kreutzer photo. Of course, this is a Dale Kreutzer backdrop. And this is a Crystal River kit. What I wanted to replicate is some of the fun scenes that happened on the narrow gauge. And this is Bob Richardson with his gut buster. As you know, Bob Richardson put hundreds or thousands of miles, similar to Otto Perry, traveling all over and taking great narrow gauge pictures. So this is another Dale Kreutzer photo, the other side of the stockyard. And this is, similar to all my cabooses. I kind of got a wild hair and decided to make decoder controlled marker lights in all my cabooses. You'll later on see another caboose with the lights lit up. But so what I have done is gone about as crazy as you can. I've got Jack Waldron phosphor bronze wipers on the trucks to bring in the electricity so that and a stay alive so it doesn't flicker, and a decoder control so that the you can turn the lights on and off by punching in the caboose number. The fun thing about making a lighted caboose, though, is when you've got a brass caboose, and how do you keep the trucks from shorting out the electricity, from the left and right rails into the car. And it's by using a plastic PBL caboose truck and wiring the phosphor bronze wipers with a little piece of 30 gauge wire through the frame so that you don't short out the caboose. Now we're going to head around the corner to pre-sculch tank. This is where the dormer is on my, since I have shed dormers on my garage. And there's a dormer corner over here, and Bill Adkins goes, well, what are you going to do with that corner? Why? And you don't even have the pre-sculch tank. So I took a piece of scrap backdrop that I had left over from something Dale had done, made the pre-sculch tank, and kind of made a scene in the dormer corner. This, by the way, is the only RGS tank with a sectional roof. All the other roofs on all the other tanks on the RGS were round. And of course, this one is motorized too. Now we're going to come around the corner into the south end of Rico, where the Clifton and Burnett coal chute was. This is the Clifton and Burnett coal chute. This coal chute, by the way, is not a Crystal River kit. Mike Blazek scratch built this years before there was a Crystal River kit. And then Dale took this absolutely wonderful photograph. So this is my photograph of the other side of the Clifton Burnett coal chute, coal tipple. And I love to add little details, like about half of my locomotives have a fireman actually shoveling coal on the apron between the tender and the locomotive. It gives it a little more interest to me, and a brakeman, of course. So now we're going to head into Rico. And as we go around, you can see we're just traversing all the way around the layout. And this is the helicopter shot. Dale did this for me. And interesting is that I bought this from Gabe Bradford in San Diego. Mike Blazek did all the drawings in the DNRG and RGS books because he's an architect. He did all the drawings of all the buildings. Well, these were all kits, not kits, these are scratch built structures he made. And this is before any kits were out for any of this stuff. The fun thing about the depot is that he used 1/8" plywood substructure, like I use 80,000 styrene, to hold the wainscoting and the shiplap on the building. But the real kicker is the fact that this roof on the depot was made before there were strip shingles. There are something like 12,000 individual shingles glued on the Rico depot roof. And I am a very lucky person to have these buildings. So like I said, this is plywood. I basically added all the details to complete the scene, the garden, and so on and so forth. So this is a more of an eye level shot of the depot and how I got it all detailed up with, again, another Dale Kreutzer backdrop for me. And the fascia, you wonder what these holes are for. So let me show you what I do with the holes. So what I didn't say earlier is that it's hard to run a point-to-point railroad without a couple of turntables or Ys or whatever else. And so I decided to, with Dale's suggestion, to make it a circular layout. And so now we've got a staging yard under Rico. Got Durango at one end and Ridgeway at the other. And this off-angle shot, which is kind of a goofy angle look, is to show you the control board with the LEDs in it, so you know which way, what route you're taking when you go through the staging yard. And then these are the knobs for the Brian Ellerby turnout controls. And that's what I'm going to show you now. Brian Ellerby was a genius at making things like this. And he was fortunate because he could use all of the staff at Evergreen Styrene to make these pieces. He would pick up these angle pieces from Boeing surplus. These are just rotary switches, 2-pole, 2-position rotary switches that control not only the detents hold the turnouts in place. You can just wire things right to the frog, and you don't need a frog juicer or anything like that to control the polarity of your frog. You just use the rotary switch. And then Brian invented all these different pieces to control turnouts. I just added to it by using the junction pieces to hang from the plywood so that I could keep all the rods straight without them flopping around. So that's kind of what, and these things are, I call them the Mercedes-Benz turnout controls. I've had them in there for 12 years. I've adjusted one turnout slightly one time. These things just last forever without ever getting out of whack. So here's another Rico scene. I like to have fun with my scenes. This is actually a scratch-built speeder. I just used HON3 goose wheels and took some brass and some styrene and made a speeder. And then this is the real fun thing is this is an HO Model T radiator turned upside down to make a Fairmont radiator. One of the other things I like to do with my people is I put a wash of black oil on there with a little bit of, again, odorless turpentine, although easily you could use soapy water and acrylics if you don't want to use turpentine. But the main thing is that what you do when you put the washes on these people, you make them look like real people. The eyes and the mouth pop out, the creases in the overalls pop out. You make them look like people instead of just little dummies in a you know, Macy's storefront window. So this is the other end of the depot, looking into the engine house and the tank and all that. And the main thing, other thing I want to add in here is this is another one of my decoder controlled cabooses, this time lit up. But this one, of course, had a cupola lights to go with it. And that's a Laurie McLean brakeman with his own lit lantern there. And so I had to wire all those guys together. And so all 5 of my cabooses are decoder controlled lighted cabooses. And another 39 Chevy sedan. So now we're going to head out of Rico, and I'm cheating a little bit here. This is Sawpit, and Sawpit is actually between Vance Junction and Placerville. So don't get your underwear in a bunch too much about the fact that this really doesn't belong here on the RGS. Sometimes when we build layouts, we want to do the scenes we like, so we just put them the way we want them. And this goes around the coke ovens, and then this is the Gallagher Loop, which was at the head end of the Dolores River. This is where this Gallagher Loop acted in the same way that the Ophir Loop did. It was a way to go up a side canyon and gain elevation to make it up over Lizard Head Pass. Same idea. The Gallagher Loop comes down underneath Sawpit and ends up in the staging yard underneath Rico. The other end of the staging yard goes underneath the Clifton and Burnett coal chute and comes out on this lift out bridge back into Dolores. So now let's go to Sawpit. I had a black and white photograph of Sawpit store, and I just couldn't help myself. I had to make the Sawpit store. So that is a scratch-built styrene store that I made. The spacing for the board and batten wasn't there wasn't board and batten of that spacing to match S-scale. So what I ended up using is V-groove siding and then put my own battens over it at the correct spacing because I could get V-groove siding at the correct spacing. And of course, you got to add signs and people and somebody getting gas and somebody getting a tire fixed. And of course, the owner's complaining to the mechanic about how he's doing it. And the roof again, the corrugated metal roof again is actual corrugated metal put on evergreen styrene corrugated metal. It makes the building strong and the corrugations don't come loose or aren't fragile. So this was a little fun project and a Dale Kreutzer backdrop, but this is my dormer. So we have a little trouble doing scenery on that because I'm not a good backdrop painter. This is the other part of Sawpit. This is the Sawpit tipple, also known as the Primos ore loading bin. Crystal River kit built by Dave Woodrell. Dale and I have kept Dave in the hobby for a while after he finished his layout by having him build various structures for us, including the Conoco facility and the grade school in Dolores and the tipple here. So now we're going to head to coke ovens. This was on the way to Lizard Head just before the Gallagher Loop. Again, a Dale Kreutzer backdrop and another VNT tank with a PBL motor in it. Scratch-built section house. So we're heading on up the hill. And I just love speeder sheds, and I love these speeder kits made by Tomalco years ago. So I think I've got about 4 of those feeder sheds. Sorry about the jump. And I just like to add a lot of junk and so forth to my scenes to make them look real. So this is the end of my slideshow, and I'm going to go back to this one. This is my favorite Dale Kreutzer photo. I wanted it to be a Gazette cover. Dale is such a careful photographer that he didn't like this photo because he thought this was a little too out of focus. And I argued with him that I thought Mike Glassick just weathered the devil out of this wood. And so you can argue whether this part of the Clifton and Brent coal chute's out of focus or whether it is just weathered a whole lot by Mike. But anyway, I just think that this is one of the more beautiful scenes that Dale's ever photographed. Someday I'd love to see it on the Gazette, cover of the Gazette. So I'm ready for questions, and if you want, I will scroll back to any photograph and discuss anything in any photograph if somebody wants to, you know, ask questions.
Well, thank you, Bill. That was an excellent presentation.
How did you do your hay bales, Bill?
The hay bales, I think, was a block of either basswood or balsa wood. Block of wood with the corners that was the appropriate size for a hay bale, slightly sanded rounded corners. And now I would use static grass, but at the time I made them, my wife had an asparagus fern, and I would cut off sprigs of asparagus fern and let it dry. And it essentially acted the same as static grass. What I would use is maybe the shortest static grass you can get and kind of coat it in Aleene's glue and, you know, kind of do like a Kentucky Fried Chicken. Just roll that piece of wood in the static grass and then get some real thin thread, some, you know, rough colored thread and tie it around. That's how I made the hay bales.
I do want to let you know that I put in the chat room the link to a video of Bill's layout that is on the Trackside Model Railroading website. And Ross and Jenny that do these videos have offered us a 25% discount on all of their other layout tours on their website using the code 4DPNR. So I just wanted to make sure you're aware of that. And I will put this in the recording that we make of today's presentation as well.
Hello again. This is another reminder that this virtual layout tour has been brought to you by members of the 4th Division of the Pacific Northwest region of the National Model Railroad Association. And we hope you've enjoyed it. And we want to encourage you to, again, find out about the NMRA online. Both PNR and NMRA have an excellent website where you can get information about joining and participating in this and other activities like our clinics that are held all over the region. So thank you for joining us today and wish you great modeling.